Have you ever thought about how different the feeling of love is from the feeling of hunger? Well, what if I told you that the brain signal that helps us form our deepest social bonds is secretly tied to the one that tells us when we're full? It sounds almost impossible, right? But deep inside our brains, two systems we always thought were separate are actually two sides of the same coin, a single master control circuit. So let's explore this incredible hidden connection.
So for decades, scientists had this really neat and tidy story. You had oxytocin over here, everyone knows it as the love hormone, right? It's all about social bonding, childbirth, that warm, fuzzy feeling. Then, in a completely different corner, you had the melanocortin system. This was the brain's no-nonsense accountant, managing things like metabolism and body weight. They were studied in separate labs for totally different reasons. Each one had its own kingdom.
But what if that whole tidy separation was just wrong? What if, instead of being two different systems, they were actually tangled up together, part of a much bigger, more intricate story? Well, that single question has completely flipped our understanding of how the brain manages some of our most basic needs.
To really untangle this mystery, we have to follow the wires. Literally. We're going to start by looking at the brain's physical architecture, where scientists found that these two systems aren't just neighbors, they're practically roommates.
Okay, our journey is taking us deep into a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. You can think of it as the central command center for all our basic survival instincts. And we're zooming in on this information superhighway that connects two really important hubs, the arcuate nucleus, or ARH, and the paraventricular nucleus, the PVH.
Now, when scientists started mapping out the connections on this superhighway, they found a number that just seemed way too perfect to be a coincidence. About 50%. But 50% of what?
And here's the answer. That 50% is all about proximity. It turns out that roughly half of all the brain fibers that scream, "I'm full," and about half of the fibers that scream, "I'm starving," physically plug directly into the brain cells that produce oxytocin. This isn't just a random layout, it's like a perfectly designed intersection, putting the love hormone system right in the driver's seat of our appetite control.
And get this, it is not a one-way street. The oxytocin neurons talk back. They fire their own signals right back to the appetite centers, which creates this powerful, constant feedback loop. So this isn't just a command being sent down a chain. It's a nonstop conversation happening inside our heads.
But believe it or not, the story gets even deeper. The connection isn't just about the adult brain's wiring. To really get it, we have to go back in time, way back, to when the brain is first being built.
You know, in neuroscience, there's this really important concept called a critical period. Think of it as a brief, high-stakes moment early in life when the brain is basically like wet cement. Any experiences or signals during this period don't just pass through. They leave a permanent mark, shaping the brain's structure for a lifetime.
And when we look at this developmental timeline, we see something absolutely stunning. During that wet cement phase right after birth, that neonatal critical period, oxytocin does something way more profound than just talk to the appetite system. It acts as its construction manager. The oxytocin cells are actually the first ones to switch on, and they send out signals that literally guide the appetite control wires to their proper targets. It hardwires the whole metabolic circuit for life. So here's the big takeaway. Oxytocin is what scientists call a neurotrophic factor. But an easier way to think about it is like a developmental architect. It doesn't just help build the house, it provides the actual blueprints, the essential instructions, making sure that the entire appetite control system gets built correctly right from the very beginning. And the process itself is just elegant. During this crucial window, the oxytocin neurons fire up, and they release these tiny little bubbles packed with chemical instructions. These instructions are then picked up by the growing appetite fibers, telling them exactly where to go and what to connect to. It's an amazing process that ensures the circuit is wired for a healthy metabolism. Okay, so the circuit is built. Now what? How does this amazing system actually work in our day-to-day adult lives? How does it manage both what we eat and how we connect with each other? While the key piece of the puzzle is a molecule called the melanocortin 4 receptor, or MC4R for short. This little receptor sits right on the surface of our oxytocin neurons, and it basically acts as the master switch. When all those signals about our energy levels come in, this is the switch that gets flipped to turn that information into action. And this is where the brain gets really, really clever. This one MC4R switch is kind of like a light switch that has a dimmer. When you flip it one way, it triggers something called the GQ pathway. Just think of this as the main stop eating now signal. It's clean, it's precise, but that same switch can also be pushed a different way, activating the GS pathway.
This one is more of a general let's boost energy command, but it can come with side effects like raising your blood pressure. The point is, the brain uses one molecule to do two very different jobs. It's incredibly efficient.
And this circuit doesn't just stop in the hypothalamus. It actually reaches down into the hindbrain, creating this brilliant integration hub. This allows the brain to take long-term information, like your body's overall energy stores, and combine it with real-time, up-to-the-minute signals of fullness coming directly from your stomach after you've eaten a meal.
And this chart, this really shows you the power of teamwork. Okay, so a signal from your gut, CCK, that's the first bar. It makes you feel a little full. Fine. Oxytocin on its own, the second bar, it barely does anything for satiety. But look what happens when you put them together in that third bar. The effect isn't just added up, it's multiplied. They create this powerful, synergistic, I am definitely full signal that is so much stronger than either one alone.
It's an amazing system when everything is working. But what happens when it breaks? Well, looking at those failures shows us just how absolutely critical this master axis is for our health.
Just let that sink in for a moment. This quote from the research perfectly captures the heartbreaking result of a broken circuit. Imagine feeling a constant, relentless hunger, a brain that is literally screaming that you are starving, even when your body has more than enough fuel. That is the reality for people with these conditions.
So this table lays it all out. It shows us how different genetic disorders are really just different ways of breaking the exact same circuit. Let's walk through it. In Prader-Willi Syndrome, many of the oxytocin cells themselves are just gone. So the stop-eating signal gets sent, but it has nowhere to land. In some types of genetic obesity, that MC4R master switch we talked about is broken. And in something called POMC deficiency, the problem's at the very start. The initial I'm full signal is never even sent. 3 different glitches, 1 devastating result. A brain that constantly thinks it's starving.
But here's where the story gets really hopeful. Because we understand this master circuit in so much detail now, we can actually start to imagine a future with revolutionary new treatments that can repair or maybe even bypass these breaks. And what's on the horizon is incredibly exciting. Scientists are working on biased drugs that can specifically flip only the satiety part of that MC4R switch, avoiding the side effects. They're looking into using these kinds of drugs to boost oxytocin during therapy for social disorders. And maybe most profound of all, they're exploring whether giving oxytocin during that tiny neonatal critical period could actually help rewire the brain correctly in at-risk infants right from the start.
So what began as 2 totally separate stories, one about hunger and one about love, has really merged into this one unified theory of how our brain manages to keep us alive. And it leaves us with this final, profound question. Could this one single elegant pathway in our brain hold the key not only to treating our deepest metabolic disorders, but also to better understanding and maybe even strengthening our most fundamental human need, the need for connection?